It wasn't the first time a group of thrill-seekers had decided to chase a legend, but for Caesar, Josh, and Ezekiel, this trip wasn't just another urban exploration adventure. They were searching for the infamous ghost ship known as the Widow's Grasp. For decades, rumors swirled about the ship's cursed crew, the strange lights seen at sea, and the few brave or foolish souls who returned with stories they couldn't explain. But no one had ever gotten close enough to find the truth. Until now. Caesar was the brains of the operation. Always planning, always calculating. He'd spent months studying maps, cross-referencing old newspaper clippings, and piecing together a pattern from the sightings. Josh, his best friend since high school, was the guy who made things happen. Confident, resourceful, and just reckless enough to make this whole thing exciting. Ezekiel, the newest addition to the group, brought the tech. He had all the fancy equipment, a thermal camera, EVP recorders, even a drone rigged for night vision. The three of them had one goal: find the Widow's Grasp, document everything, and, if they were lucky, become legends themselves. They chartered a boat from a sketchy harbor in Maine. The captain, an old man who introduced himself only as Red, didn't ask many questions. He just looked at them with an expression that was half amusement, half pity. "You kids know what you're doing?" Red asked as they loaded up the gear. "We've done this before," Caesar replied confidently. Red laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. "Not out here, you haven't." The first few hours at sea were uneventful. The sun was still up and the ocean was calm, but there was an odd stillness in the air. Ezekiel set up his equipment, mumbling about battery life and signal strength, while Josh leaned against the railing, staring out at the horizon. By the time the sun dipped below the waterline, things started to feel off. "Did you hear that?" Ezekiel asked, looking up from his monitor. "Hear what?" Josh replied. "Knocking, like someone tapping on the hull." Caesar frowned. "It's probably the waves," but Ezekiel shook his head. "It's too rhythmic, like a signal." Josh laughed it off, but the tension in the air was undeniable. They weren't even close to the ship yet, and already the ocean seemed alive with unseen eyes watching their every move. Around midnight, the fog rolled in, thick, heavy, and unnatural. Even Red seemed uneasy. "Can't go much farther in this," he muttered. "Not unless you want to end up like the Widow's crew." "What do you mean?" Caesar asked. Red hesitated, then shook his head. "Some things are better left alone." But Caesar wasn't backing down. "We're paying you to take us to the coordinates." With a reluctant nod, Red continued. The boat crept forward, cutting through the fog like a knife through cotton. Then they saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, vague and ghostly, barely distinguishable from the mist. But as they got closer, the details came into focus. The Widow's Grasp was real, its masts rising like skeletal fingers, its hull encrusted with barnacles and decay. The ship looked frozen in time, as though it had been waiting for them. Josh let out a low whistle. "I can't believe it. It's actually here." Ezekiel was already setting up the drone. "Let's get some footage before the fog messes with the signal." But Caesar had a different idea. "We're going aboard." The Widow's deck groaned under their weight, every step a protest from a structure that hadn't seen life in decades, maybe longer. The air smelled of salt and rot, and the silence was deafening. "Let's stick together," Caesar said, his voice low. Josh rolled his eyes. "What, you think ghosts are going to jump out at us?" But Ezekiel was quiet, his eyes darting around as though he could feel something the others couldn't. They found the captain's quarters first. The door was warped, but Josh kicked it open with ease. Inside, a desk sat covered in brittle papers, maps, and a compass that spun erratically, as if caught in a magnetic storm. "This is gold," Ezekiel whispered, snapping photos. Then, from somewhere deep within the ship, came the sound of footsteps. At first they thought it was Red, but when Caesar tried to radio him, there was no response. "Could be the wind," Josh said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Since when does wind sound like boots on wood?" Ezekiel shot back. The footsteps grew louder, echoing up from the lower decks. Then came a low, guttural moan, the kind that makes your stomach twist and your instincts scream to run. "We need to get out of here," Ezekiel said, backing toward the exit. But Caesar was already heading toward the sound. "This is what we came for." Josh hesitated, torn between his friend and the mounting dread clawing at his chest. Finally, he followed, and Ezekiel, cursing under his breath, brought up the rear. The lower decks were a labyrinth of narrow corridors and collapsing beams. The deeper they went, the colder it got, until their breath fogged in the dim light of their flashlights. Then they found it, a room filled with skeletal remains, their bony hands clutching at the walls as though trying to escape. "Oh my God!" Ezekiel whispered. Josh turned to Caesar. "You got your proof. Let's go." But Caesar was fixated on something else. In the center of the room sat a chest, its lid slightly ajar. "Caesar, don't," Ezekiel warned. Ignoring him, Caesar opened the chest. Inside was a strange, pulsating orb glowing faintly with an eerie green light. The moment Caesar touched it, the ship came alive. The moaning grew louder, the footsteps faster. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with rage and despair. "You've doomed us," Ezekiel shouted, grabbing Caesar's arm. Before anyone could react, Josh pulled a knife from his belt. "What the hell are you doing?" Caesar demanded. Josh's face was pale, his eyes wild. "We're not leaving this ship alive. Not all of us." Caesar realized too late what was happening. Josh had planned this from the start: bring them to the widow's grasp, claim the treasure, and leave no witnesses. The fight was brutal, chaotic. In the struggle, the orb shattered, unleashing a blinding light that filled the room. When it faded, the ship was silent once more. But only Ezekiel stumbled back onto Red's boat, his face pale and his hands trembling. "What happened to the others?" Red asked. Ezekiel didn't answer. He just stared at the widow's grasp as it disappeared into the fog, taking its secrets and its vengeance with it. Subscribe if you want more terrifying tales. Don't forget to watch the next video.